Hey guys, today we're continuing the History, Flaws, and Cancelled series and looking at the quirky Plymouth Prowler called the Chrysler Prowler after Plymouth was discontinued. Before we start, I do want to say thanks to Yuri from the Straight Pipes on YouTube. If you follow their channel, you know that he is a massive Prowler fan and has one in yellow.
The most beautiful car in the world.
He first gave me the idea for this video months ago and has provided me with some footage and extra information on the Prowlers, so thanks again, man. If you're new to these types of videos, the first part focuses on looking back at the history of the car and all the details and specs, and then we jump to talking about the events that led to the car being cancelled and any flaws that it had. The Prowler lived through 5 model years, 1997 and then 1999 to 2002, carrying the Plymouth name for the first little bit, and then it would become a Chrysler for the final 2 years. So let's get into it. The Prowler was a retro-style 2-door roadster with a front engine and rear-wheel drive layout. I'll talk more about this in the cancelled portion of the video, but it later came out that this was somewhat of an experiment for Chrysler engineers to practice and begin to build aluminum vehicles. Chrysler had given their engineers the freedom to design some type of hot rod or sportster vehicle, and this is what they came up with. The world would first see the Prowler as a concept at the Detroit Auto Show in 1993, but at first, many thought this was just a PR stunt and they didn't take it seriously. The concept would end up on the desk of Chrysler design and international director Thomas C. Gale. He had owned a 1932 hot rod Ford, and he had a soft spot for these types of vehicles, so he was the one at Chrysler headquarters who approved the Prowler for production. Chrysler had also sponsored a project at the Art Center College of Design in Pasadena, California, where Douglas Chip Foose wrote a thesis that would include some drawings of a retro roadster, so Chrysler also took some influence from his designs as well. They would end up building the Prowler on the PR platform and releasing it for the 1997 model year. The Prowler was never going to be a big seller, again we'll get into that later, so it could only have been created by a company with very deep pockets and a large parts bin. Enter Chrysler Corporation, who had total revenues of $61.4 billion for 1996, pre-tax earnings of $6.09 billion, and a net profit of $3.5 billion. They also hadn't lost money in 3 years, and had a 16.2% automotive market share. And of course they had many vehicles from which they could carry over parts, which they did to keep costs down for the Prowler. At this time, Dodge was the fun and exciting brand, while Plymouth was really basic and boring, essentially an entry-level brand. The idea was that the Prowler could give Plymouth something fun and original to reinvigorate that brand. The Prowler only had one trim level throughout its lifetime, and the MSRP started at $38,300 in 1997, and that would rise to $44,625 by 2002. In today's dollars, that would make the Prowler a mid-$60,000 vehicle. Now let's talk about the exterior of this thing, because that's a major part of the appeal here. I want to take a quote from Don Sherman, who wrote an article about the Prowler some 24 years ago for Motor Trend, where he said, quote, "In this time of largely amorphous auto styling, the Prowler is a delight to the eyes, a reward to the soul, exactly as it should be to continue the finest American artisan traditions passed down through the ages by the master builders of street rodding." End quote. I can't really describe the design any better than that. It's a cool, stylish, and exotic head turner, and it stands out no matter what you put it next to. The whole car kind of looks like a bug, helped by those weird-looking gray front bumpers, which look like insect wings, and they would later switch those to be black. Those were federally mandated, so they had to stay if Chrysler wanted this car to be road legal. Other than that, there was a lack of front fenders or bumper. The wheelbase was 113.3 inches, longer than Chrysler's flagship LHS sedan, and there was just 4.5 inches of road clearance. Most of the car was constructed from aluminum, including the hood, deck lid, doors, control arms, steering knuckles, frame, and cross members. The lateral brace under the dashboard was made from magnesium, while the engine's exhaust manifolds were stainless steel, shaving off even more weight. The result meant a weight of 2,832 pounds, including 900 coming from aluminum. The bodywork is beautiful, wrapping around the wheels and sweeping all the way to the rear, where it had a very high belt line. The projector beam headlights are thin and bug-eyed, while the taillights are also very narrow, found on the outer edges of the rear end. A key aspect of the design was the various paint colors available, spicing up the Prowler look even further. Across the entire production run, there were 12 available colors. I'll try to add as many of the colors as I can throughout the video. The first year in 1997 would start off with just purple metallic, and then the rest were added, like Prowler Yellow, Black, and Red Clear Coat, Prowler Bright Silver Metallic, Prowler Orange Pearl Coat, Inca Gold Pearl Coat, and Deep Candy Red Pearl Coat. There were also a few special editions. The Woodward edition was finished in two-tone black and red with just 153 of those, while there was also 163 black tie editions that had a two-tone black and silver paint job. The Mulholland edition would get a midnight blue pearl coat with 1,278 of those produced, and there was just one of the Connor Avenue editions with a high voltage blue pearl coat. This Connor Avenue edition was the last Prowler ever built, and it was auctioned off at Christie's Auction House in Manhattan for a whopping $175,000 in May of 2002, and that also included some rare styling sketches, signed memorabilia, and other unique items, and all of the money went to the National Multiple Sclerosis Society. If you drove a Prowler, one thing you'd have to give up was trunk space, as there was virtually none, since it was about 5 inches deep. The tiny trunk could fit a bag or two at most, and that's about it. Chrysler did try to get innovative by releasing a $5,075 Prowler trailer available from the dealerships. These were an add-on that looked exactly like the ass end of the vehicle, finished in the identical paint color, and they even had smaller versions of the wheels that were found on the car. Believe it or not, 20% of the Prowlers were sold with a trailer. To tow the trunk, the Prowlers would get a trailer hitch, but there was a warning on the hitch that told you not to tow any other accessory. Not only would you probably break the car, but the factory warranty would also be voided by doing that. If we look to the inside, there were all the features necessary to have the Prowler as your daily driver. That includes keyless entry, power windows and door locks, dual airbags, AC, an AM/FM stereo with a cassette, and an optional CD player behind the passenger seat. Other additions include a 320-watt Infinity sound system, leather-trimmed bucket seats and leather-wrapped steering wheel, an auto-dimming rearview mirror, and a speed-sensitive volume control found on the later models. The cabin was also a mosh pit of parts from many vehicles. As we said, Chrysler did this to save costs. The mirror controls are from the LH sedan, door handles and gauge faces from the Viper, the HVAC controls from the Neon, plastic vents from the Grand Caravan, and the steering column and turn signal from the Grand Cherokee. So it really was an interdivisional parts bin, but that allowed Chrysler to give it many premium features at the price point, so it's not a reason to complain at all. Oddly enough, all of the gauges are front and center, instead of being placed directly in front of the driver. However, the dash was beautifully detailed, with a plastic panel bezel that matched the interior paint color, and at night the gauges would light up to look even cooler. As for putting the top down, it wasn't quite a one-touch operation. Instead, it took 35 seconds. It was a nice piece that included a glass back and electric defroster. To lower it, you had to manually unfasten 2 windshield latches, pull a lever to release the locating pins in the trunk, get out of the car to open it, open up the trunk, and then fold it away back there. Now let's shift over to performance, which is one area that many felt the Prowler was lacking, even though it was the first rear-wheel drive Plymouth since the 1989 Grand Fury. Chrysler had taken a 3.5-liter V6 engine out of the LH cars, and just for the 1997 model year, it had 214 horsepower and 221 pound-feet of torque. So that resulted in some very average performance, 0 to 60 in 7.1 seconds, quarter mile in 15.5 seconds, and an electronically limited top speed of 118 miles per hour. From 1999 and onwards, Chrysler replaced it with a more powerful aluminum block, giving the Prowler a bump up to 253 horsepower and 255 pound-feet of torque. So that would help the performance times, as they went down to 5.8 seconds for the 0 to 60, 14.4 seconds to the quarter mile, and a top speed of 126 miles per hour. Every Prowler was paired with a 4-speed automatic transmission with auto stick, and there was no manual option. The Prowler had aluminum 4-wheel independent suspension that was stiff with limited travel. That meant very minimal body lean, but also a very harsh ride. In 2000, Chrysler would change up the springs, shocks, and tires, and add adjustable dampers that let the driver soften the ride. The wheels were staggered, 17 by 7 inches up front with 225/45 tires, and 20 by 10 inches in the back with 295/40 tires. While that may not seem out of line today, it was an industry first to have those 20-inch production wheels. The brakes were vented discs, 11 inches in the front and 13 inches in the rear. Before we take a look at the Cancellation, I want to talk about how the Prowler left its legacy, as these novelty cars often do. The owners loved the limited production, fun-to-drive handling, comfortable ride, and the ability to turn heads everywhere they go. They were part of a tight-knit community that included various online forums. And there were also several Prowler cruises across North America where owners got together to drive their cars. There was even a 10th anniversary celebration for the Prowler in August of 2007 at the Walter P. Chrysler Museum. I've also come across a website by the name of Prowler.ca where Tony Gertz builds very cool one-off Prowlers like a stretched 4-seater version and a Hemi-swap version with a 6.1-liter V8. One very cool event occurred in 1998 where a Prowler was sealed in a mausoleum, which is like a tomb, in Tulsa, Oklahoma. The plan is to have that be a time capsule that they're going to open in the year 2048 when they will return the car to Chrysler. So that'll be interesting to see how that car looks after being buried away for 50 years. At the 1999 SEMA show, Chrysler also unveiled the one-off Plymouth Howler, which had a truck-like bed, hard tonneau cover, 4.7-liter PowerTech V8 from a Jeep, and a 5-speed manual. The Prowler would also inspire other retro-style vehicles like the Chevy SSR, HHR, and the PT Cruiser, and the successor would end up being the 2004 Chrysler Crossfire, which Chrysler had planned to be another icon for the brand. The final 300 Prowlers produced were made in deep candy apple red. On February 15th of 2002, the very last Prowler was built at the Conner Avenue assembly plant in Detroit. As I went over in the limited production section, that car was the Conner Avenue edition, the first and only Prowler with high voltage blue paint. That car was auctioned off for charity for $175,000. So that'll bring us to the next part of the video, looking at the reasoning for the cancellation and the flaws of the Plymouth Prowler. I've come up with 5 different reasons and or flaws referring to the car, or Chrysler decision making and decision executions. So let's take a look at those reasons now. The Prowler was definitely a novelty car. It was a unique head-turner, perfect for car collectors, but not very practical, and it wouldn't work for the average person or family. 90% of the owners were males, 70% of those were married, and their median age was 52, while their median income was $190,000. So these cars obviously filled a niche market. Chrysler sold just 11,702 units globally, with 92% of them ending up in the United States. With these sales numbers, it was an unsustainable vehicle to continue for a very long production run, and as the novelty wore off and the sales dipped, the car was discontinued. One interesting fact is that these Prowlers still carry a very high resale value, as you can see by the chart, and those values are actually steadily increasing over time. Another reason for the cancellation of the Prowler was that it was technically an aluminum experiment more than anything else. Chrysler head of design Tom Gale spoke a lot about this topic, with a long quote that you can find on screen. I'll try to summarize what he said. He basically went on about how this was an exercise in research for how to use aluminum, long before it was common for production vehicles. Chrysler didn't have any applied research, so this would help the engineers in the company learn about aluminum stamping, welding, forming, and more. Gale basically saw the trends that were moving towards aluminum, and wanted to gain more expertise and knowledge by adding it into a production environment. On screen you can see pictures of many examples of where it was used. As I said, over 900 pounds worth on the car, in almost every place you can think of. Gale was also asked if the Prowler was meant to be a volume seller, with which he responded with, quote, "Oh no, never, never, ever. The real reason, the rationale in my view, was always applied research for using aluminum," end quote. So that shows the true intentions with the Prowler, and Gale's reasoning for actually approving the vehicle in the first place. Another major factor in creating the Prowler was to help differentiate the Plymouth and Chrysler brands, and it worked. Again, the Prowler was supposed to be here for a short time to make an impact. Tom Marinelli, the vice president of Chrysler at the time, said, quote, "We anticipated a 5-year run for Prowler when we started production in 1997. Like Dodge Viper and Chrysler PT Cruiser, Prowler showcases the innovation, technology, and creativity within this company," end quote. And Tom Gale also talked about how the concept cars like the Prowler really helped to differentiate Chrysler in a meaningful way, and that was largely responsible for the resurgence of the company in the 1990s. So the Prowler was not really meant to stick around longer than 5 model years. It was just there to help differentiate Plymouth. Now I want to take a look at some critiques of the Prowler. These are not severe or major issues, nor are they the reasons for cancellation at all, but I thought it was interesting and worth discussing. The first big criticism was against the drivetrain, a V6 with no manual transmission. The first V6 in 1997 only had 214 horsepower and rather weak performance for a sports car, but that engine was improved for the rest of the production, gaining another 39 horsepower. Even if you argue that the V6 was fine, Chrysler head of designer Tom Gale regretted the decision. He said, quote, "If we had to do it over again, I would probably have wanted a V8. I think the Prowler would have been more successful had we gone with a V8. We were trying to be responsible. Here you've got this totally irresponsible project, and yet you're trying to be responsible by using a V6, end quote. Other critiques were made up with the suspension, as we discussed in the performance section. Owners felt that the early models had a very stiff suspension, resulting in a ride that was too harsh. Chrysler would address this, though, with a newer design and adjustable dampers from 2000 and onwards. The interior was also tight, with small footwells, a bathtub seating position, and narrow doorways, making the cabin tricky to enter and exit. Even with the seat raised to its highest position, the door panel was only a few inches below your head. Taller people over 6 feet in height would also find that their heads rubbed the cloth roof when the top was down. And of course, the trunk space was almost non-existent, but then again, you don't really buy this car if you need a lot of room. Finally, the visibility was another concern for many. As I said, the beltline was very high, and your sight got worse with the top up. The rear track was also very wide as a Ferrari F50, so you couldn't see the front or rear wheels well. And the development engineer Will Knudsen said, quote, "Every guy who drives this thing initially nails a curb," end quote. Finally, I wanted to go over some of the common flaws that I found with the Prowler. Those included some issues with the factory stereo system, like hissing, static, or blown speakers, premature suspension wear, broken window regulators, and the occasional blown head gasket on the 3.5-liter engine. So that's the end of the video, guys. If you like this type of video, let me know in the comment section below, and make sure to give some suggestions on what car I should do next. How do you guys feel about the Plymouth Prowler? Do you love it? Do you hate it? And did you ever own one of these? As always, thanks for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe for all your Mopar content, and I'll see you in the next video.